All
All
right.
right.
Welcome to the Domestic Draft
And
Podcast. I'm Evan Bierman here with Dan Slowick. We're going to be talking all things Cubs baseball today with a very special guest. But first, Dan, what are you drinking, man?
I have a beer from a brewery that I had to look how to pronounce their name, but it turns out it's rather simple. It's basically Brewery West, but it's spelled the Dutch way, I believe. It's a native Dutch word. So it's Brouwerij. So it's like Brewery West. And it's out near San Pedro, which is near Los Angeles, not quite San Diego. But I saw it at the local supermarket, so I picked it up. And the beer that I'm drinking is called Pop Fuji. It's a Pilsner. It's really good. I really like this one. 3.7 on Untapped. It's really light, but it also carries a lot of flavor. Normally, some Pilsners can feel a little watered down. I told you before we started recording, I took a sip. It tastes like it's got a lot of like Allagash white flavors to it, to where it kind of is a little, you could feel that it tastes a little bit of the fruit, even some of the spice in there as well. But it's their take on the historic Keller beer. It's an unfiltered Pilsner. It's got malt sweetness combined with subtle fruit and spice. That's the kind of Allagash white that I got there. And it's really, really good. About the brewery, it was founded in 2010, and it was founded by Brian Mercer, who was kind of self-proclaimed gypsy contract brewer traveling all throughout California and just kind of home brewing for places. He partnered up with his friend Dave Holop, and they kind of opened up this place in 2016 to where they had a brick and mortar. So from 2010, home brewing to a brick and mortar in 2016 out in San Pedro. And it's this massive facility they have out there. They're putting out really, really good beer. And it's an old Navy kind of warehouse that they converted into a brewery. So I'm looking forward next time going up north to visit some family to check this place out because the beer is really good. What do you got?
Yeah, that's really cool. And I feel like to take 6 years and bounce around different breweries and kind of see how everyone else is doing it, I feel like that was probably really helpful when they were opening their own spot. So the brewery I have today is 1090 Brewing Company. It's out of Glenview, Illinois. The name 1090 comes from the brewing process itself. 1090 or 1.090 is the approximate measurement of original gravity for each of their flagship beers. The original gravity measurement, if you're not familiar, is taken early in the brewing process, denotes a beer with a higher amount of fermentable sugars than most common beers. Most brewers, this place is a little bit different as well. Most brewers create a beer and then find a food to pair with it. 1090 starts with their food because they have a chef that came to them with over 20 years of experience. So they have great food. They create the food and then they create a beer that pairs well with that food. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They also do live music, and you have a nice view of the brewing process itself there from the bar. The beer I have is a half wit. It's a Belgian style ale, 5.7%. It's a 3.58 on Untapped. It's brewed with orange peel and coriander. So get a little bit like a Blue Moon taste at the end with that orange peel in there. So I'm a big fan of this beer, actually. Pick this up if you see it out. And speaking of half wit, I consider myself a little bit of a half wit on the Cubs farm system. So we're bringing in our next guest, Bryan Smith. He's a writer for Bleacher Nation. You can find him on Twitter at Cub Prospects to help us out. Bryan, thanks so much for joining us.
That was a pro transition right there. the half wit on the farm system. I like it.
Yeah, there we go.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I mean, we are jacked. I mean, the Cubs, it's hard right now not to be excited about the future because of what we're seeing at the major league level right now. But tell us a little bit about yourself first, how you got started with Bleacher Nation, how long you've been a writer.
Sure. Well, I'm gonna start by telling you about the beer first, and then I'll go through my biography. But I tonight I'm drinking my favorite beer, which is called Le Tub, and it's by a brewery in Chicago here called Winer Beer Company, Whiner. It's a brewery that's on the south side, the back of the yards neighborhood, which is just a little bit west of Guaranteed Rate Field. And it's a place I've loved to go in the past. They have a great little brewery there, and their beers are really interesting. I think they came out at a time where Chicago was just like all IPAs and all really hopped stuff, and they came out making different beers, and I think kind of led the Chicago movement towards a lot of sour stuff, a lot more like fruit-based stuff. And so this is their farmhouse ale. Really easy drinking for me, and just like a hint of sour, but not so sour that you can't have 5 of them.
Man, that was professional. Like you've done it before.
Yeah.
It's our new third.
I'll shout Weiner out anytime in hopes that they send some free beer at some point.
Definitely.
There we go. Yeah.
But yeah, to talk about myself a little bit and how I got it started with this stuff, I was a writer about the minor leagues and college baseball and stuff during college, and right after college wrote for minorleaguebaseball.com, Fangraphs, Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, some of those types of sites. And then when I got a job in sort of the business world, ended up stopping and not doing anything for 8 years or so. And about 4 years ago, just started the Twitter account that I have and anonymously, and that got going and people seemed interested. And at one point, Brett at Bleacher Nation reached out and they had an opening for a minor league writer, and it was a nice fit. So it's been a good couple of years there. And, I was a Bleacher Nation fan before I was a writer there. So nice. It's been a good couple of years, especially with the farm system starting to, bear some real fruit here.
Right. I'm interested in your fascination with like the farm system. And you said you started out minor league, college, not typical. I feel like most people look at the bigs, but what's with the fascination with the minor leagues?
Yeah, it dates back to sort of when I was a kid. My family, we used to go on some baseball trips around the country where it would be like half minor league, half major league. My dad was the type of guy that had a Baseball America subscription and kind of kept up with that stuff. Like I'd say more than the average person, but less than the psychos like me. And during one of those trips, ended up seeing a guy who had a game-winning hit, looked really good, was really impressed with what I saw. The next year, he went from A ball to the major leagues. It was Albert Pujols. Damn. And I thought it was so cool to be able to, see somebody in the minor leagues and then have it translate like that to the big leagues. And that sort of hooked me into the minor league side of things. And, that was 21 years ago. So
that's awesome.
Has it always been with the Cubs? I mean, have you been a Cubs fan? Obviously you said you live in Lakeview. Yeah.
Yeah. I've always been a Cubs fan, although for a while when I was thinking about doing baseball writing as a profession, I did sort of successfully lose that fandom a little bit and actually sort of be able to root for all the teams. And then when I stopped writing and moved back to Chicago, sort of re-embraced it. And then now I don't think I would do anything except the Cubs. I think that's sort of just now how my fandom works and I'm just sort of embracing that part of it.
Nice. I love the story about Pujols and seeing him the next year and then Hall of Fame numbers getting put up. I'm curious if there are any prospects that you saw that you thought had that star potential, but just never panned out. Any notable names, maybe for Cubs fans?
Yeah, for the Cubs. I mean, the Cubs have had their a lot of those. I mean, Corey Patterson is right around that time, right? I mean, Albert Pujols, I don't think is a top 100 prospect in 2001, and Corey Patterson's the number one prospect in baseball at that point. But I'm trying to think. There was, and then they had a run of like real toolsy outfielders like Felix PA and guys like that.
I was at his first game.
Jackson.
I thought Felix PA was going to be it, man.
Yeah, for sure. And so it was, I would say the last 20 years for Cubs prospects, it's been, more misses than hits, except for that one magical window of a couple of years. And, and we got to see in Chicago what it looks like when you do sort of develop properly. And I think we all sort of have that belief that if you build a real good farm system from the bottom up, that it can, produce a piece of metal in the end.
Yeah. So you mentioned Pujols was kind of a surprise prospect. Were there any others that kind of jump out at you from, how long you've been writing and
I'm trying to think from a Cubs perspective. I'm like Wilson Contreras is one of the great ones. I mean, that's a story I remember. I mean, Wilson was a guy who wasn't on the radar at all and then got to AA and started hitting, and he was showing power that I don't think people really saw before, and just a guy that really worked. And I think when you see guys that jump up from the minors and surprise you, it really like goes back to work ethic. And that I do sort of believe in that as a separating thing. And the more that you talk to, guys in the organization and stuff like that, that's really what they look at, are the guys that that go out and are willing to like change themselves and evolve and adapt. And that's what separates guys. And so I'd say Wilson always sort of stands out to me. And I think when you talk about extending Wilson, one of the things for me that you would want to extend him for is he shows the organization what it looks like to be like the ultimate grinder, to go from like a non-prospect all the way to an all-star, and the Cubs sort of dedication to that as a organizational philosophy.
Yeah, we'll see if they go ahead and extend him. There's a lot of talk there. I wouldn't mind it taking a look at, players like Yadier and just being like a backbone to a franchise for 20 years, and just like, why not have that at a position that's so valuable in the game?
Yep.
So let's start talking about this current team that we have here on the north side, and let's look back to last year when we had that fire sale. And a lot of the fans kind of were pretty vocal on social media that like, what are we doing? This is the worst thing ever. And now fast forward kind of not quite a year, but to the next season, like, how would you evaluate what Jed did, looking at kind of the production of those players of that crop of talent we had, what they're doing this year, and then what's happening in our farm system?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say that even though I'm a guy that likes that side of the game, I was just like, everyone else, and one of those fans that was sort of upset about how extreme the sell-off was, and, why did it have to be every single guy? But, when I step away from the emotion of it and I look at those trades, I do think that the Cubs front office, their scouts, their R&D guys did a really good job at getting the right players in those deals. I mean, I think every one of those deals, you've seen a guy take a step forward since July 31st, and all of them have sort of raised their profile for the most part. And so I think those trades look good in the context of the overall plan. I think we can all still sort of debate whether or not we would do that, and which of those guys we would have wanted to retain as sort of the face of the franchise. But in terms of stocking the farm system with talent, they definitely did that successfully.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think a lot of fans, though, if you're looking at the top 100, a lot of people just like to look at that MLB top 100 prospects, right?
Sure.
And if you look and you take that little set of data, those 100 players, and you say the Cubs only have 3, like, is this farm system terrible because there's only 3 of those guys in there? But if you follow you kind of understand how everyone else at the lower levels is really playing pretty well this year, and there's a lot of promise, and some of those guys are going to make it on that list probably. Like PCA just moved up there, Petrol Armstrong just moved up there, I think today or the other day, to 97. So these guys are creeping up. But if you just look at those top 100, I mean, what would you say to somebody that says the Cubs farm system is still not that great, even though they got rid of all those great players?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was not great. I would say 2 years ago it was a bottom of the barrel system, and that's been a priority for them, and I think it's started to show. And if you look at a top 100 list and there's 30 teams, then the average team should have about 3 of them. So I don't think that necessarily separates the Cubs as like bottom tier, although it does probably mean that they wouldn't be at the very top. But I think the strength of this system that we've talked about over the last 8 months or so is that you really do have good depth in that, like, if you went to 250 prospects, I think the Cubs would show really well. And I think they had a lot of guys that we were like pretty confident were going to blossom into top 100 guys, if not this year, then next year. And so I don't think it's the best farm system in the game. It's probably not even like top 8, maybe not top 10, but it's getting a lot better. And I think it is like all the signs are positive that they're moving up. And I think they're definitely now in the top half of the league.
Is there any reason why this franchise has been unable to produce pitching prospects? Why has that been such a hard get for the Cubs? When, I mean, just today I saw players drafted after Albert or Morrell that are now all-stars, and like Max Fried was on there right away. Like, are we just missing? Are we not developing? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there. I mean, talking about what you just said, I think that's a good starting point, is that the Cubs had a lot of picks at the beginning of the first round. And in every single one of those examples, they picked a hitter. And that was a big belief of Theo Epstein and his front office when they came over, is that you draft college hitters mostly, you know, Almora being a high school guy, but, you know, polished hitters in the first round of the draft. And those guys don't miss. And then you take your chances from there. And I think where the Cubs faltered, generally speaking, is that they weren't looking for enough upside with those pitchers in the middle rounds. Then they were like almost drafting afraid of missing, with the exception of the year they drafted Kyle Schwarber. They saved some money off that pick and they spent money on 3 pitchers, one of whom is no longer in baseball, but the other 2, Dylan Cease, now one of the best pitchers in the American League, unfortunately, and Justin Steele, who's now, you know, a regular in the Cubs rotation. So that was the year that they really put pitching as a priority in their drafting philosophy, and they made good picks. The other years, they just didn't really have it as a philosophy, because I think what they thought was, we'll build with young hitters and we'll buy pitchers.
Right.
What do you think about Christopher Morrell as a utility man? Is he going to be up with the team the whole rest of this year? I feel like he kind of came out of nowhere. He's not a name that I had on my radar at all going into this season this year.
Right. He's flashy.
What do you think about him?
He's got confidence. He's smiling out there. He's got the charisma, like a Javi Baez type player. I like him.
Yeah, he's so fun. And I said that I knew he was a guy that David Ross was going to like, because, you know, what Chris does is he brings energy to a clubhouse. He brings energy onto the field. He's a great teammate, and he's versatile as heck. So what manager is not going to like a guy that's, you know, that he can put in any position, and a guy that is going to help the players around him, like, be happier at their job. So Chris is a really good fit. I didn't think that he was going to last in the majors more than like 3-4 weeks. I thought this was a sort of just a little depth job for a couple weeks, because he's on the 40-man roster and it doesn't hurt you to bring him up. But man, the way he's playing and the energy that he's bringing to the team, I wouldn't be surprised if that leash gets a little longer, and, you know, maybe his trial extends to all of June. And if he keeps playing like this, then you wouldn't send him down, because he really is a helpful piece. If you're going to have 13 hitters, then having one guy that can play 6 positions definitely helps.
Pretty nice. So before we get into kind of this current, we'll get into this current roster with this question, but remembering the times where, you know, we were signing kind of some veteran pitchers and flipping them towards a trade deadline, like a Samardzija. We didn't sign him, but we, you know what I mean? For prospects like Addison Russell, when we did a trade with Oakland. Is there anyone on this team that you see is gone come trade deadline? And then are you seeing any kind of pairings with other franchises with prospects that we might be doing a deal with here come the deadline?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think if the team continues to play like this, then I think we're going to see a lot of guys dealt. I mean, I think that, you know, guys like Wade Miley and Drew Smiley and, you know, I'm trying to think a lot of the bullpen
Hendricks
arms
goes. You think?
Hendricks and Contreras, it's hard to read. You know, I think Hendricks' contract is good enough that he's not going to lose a ton of value if you keep him next year, and then see where the organization goes from there. Stroman, I kind of feel similarly about. I think maybe those guys would have higher chances at staying, but, you know, Contreras is the one I think that everybody's sort of waiting for that shoe to drop. But as far as like certain organizations, I don't know that I see any particular like definite fits, but what I would say is, last year, what the Cubs were willing to do a lot was to get guys that were already on 40-man rosters from other teams. And the reason they did that was those guys have a little less value as prospects because they're already on the clock that the 40-man roster comes with. So what the Cubs decided was, we're going to get the maximum talent we can by getting these guys that other teams are discounting because they're on the 40-man rosters. I don't think the Cubs do that this year. I think they're going to have a much more crowded 40-man roster with the farm system improving. So they, I think, are going to go with guys that are probably a little further away, like more like the sort of traditional July 31st lottery ticket prospects you get. So that'd be my guess going into it, but, you know, we still got a long way to go.
So we talked about how, you know, it's been tough for us to find starting pitching prospects. What do you think about, I mean, what does that say about Caleb Killian? Do we think that this guy could be a front of the rotation starter at some point, or middle of the rotation? You know, what are your thoughts on him? Because he's probably the best pitching prospect that we have right now, right? And he's the closest, I think, up in AAA.
Yeah, I think he's their best pitching prospect. And, you know, I think when people have said the Cubs can't develop pitchers, there's always an inevitable argument about, did the Cubs develop Kyle Hendricks or not? Right. Yeah. He's the one that, does he count or does he not count? And Killian's going to be the same thing. So if he ends up working out, there's going to be people that say, well, that doesn't prove the Cubs can develop pitchers. But as far as what he brings to the table, he's really impressive. He was the guy that when they made all those trades last year, and I ended up, spending a couple of days looking at tape, he was probably my favorite guy that they acquired. Big, like traditional pitching body, almost like a Mark Pryor type body, and throws really easy, mid 90s velocity, generally knows where the ball's going pretty well. His walk rate's up this year, but I wouldn't read too much into it. It's early, and he was pitching in cold Iowa in April. I think that'll work itself out. And he's got probably 4 other secondary pitches that he pitches off the fastball. And he's a guy that I think has a low floor to be a, 3rd, 4th starter for a long time. But I also do see some potential that he could get to be like a 2. I see some Zach Wheeler in him, for example, as a guy that a high end guy that he could look like. So he's a nice blend of somebody that I feel very confident will contribute. And I also see some hope that he could be an all-star someday.
Love that. Love to hear it.
Speaking of prospects being all-stars, who is your favorite that we have right now that you see the highest ceiling? A lot of people say it's probably Christian Hernandez. Are you on that same train, or do you have somebody else that is that might be that kid?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the highest ceiling would be one of 3 guys. It would be Christian Hernandez, the young shortstop you mentioned, but he is very far away and he's rough around the edges, so it's going to take
only
some
18.
Time. Yeah, only 18, not even playing yet his minor league season. His starts up in 14 days here. I think the second option would be Brennan Davis, who, has gotten off to a slow start this year, then went on the injured list with a back injury, but when Brennan's right, he's profiling as a 30 home run outfielder in the bigs. So that's a pretty darn high ceiling. And then the other one would be Kevin Alcantra, who the Cubs got for Anthony Rizzo in that trade. Alcantara is he's one of those coin flip prospects where you don't know if he's going to make it, but if everything hits like it could, he could be an incredible player. He looks like a small forward almost playing baseball. And when he fills out, I think he's going to have a ton of power. I've been watching him this year in Myrtle Beach. He plays right now he plays a really good center field. I think he'd be a really plus right fielder down the line, and someone I could see being a really good player, but he's also, he's like Christian, he's rough around the edges. So you just don't know how high that floor is.
Okay. What about, I'm surprised you didn't mention Owen Casey, because I see his name come up a lot on your Twitter feed these days. And I feel like now when you type his name, maybe the bomb emoji just pops up right there after him.
Right.
But tell us what you think about him. Could this guy be a mainstay in the outfield? And maybe a few years from now, I think he's still at high A, right? So he's still got a bit of time.
Yeah. Owen entered the year, I think, as my number 3 prospect in the system. I'd still probably have him 5, 6. I mean, we've had some guys jump up, but Owen has really started to turn it around in high A after a slow start. He's a guy that he came over for Darvish. He has a bunch of raw power. He's this big kind of lumbering kid from Canada, good throwing arm. I do think that in time he might end up at first base. So, in terms of projecting ceilings, that's going to limit your ceiling just a little bit because you're down the spectrum a little bit there. But he could really hit. He's got a good plate approach. He hits to all fields, and I think when he learns to pull that ball with that and cheat a little bit on those fastballs, he could be a 30 home run guy too down the line.
I want to circle back to Brennan Davis. I know he's hurt right now. He's got that lower back issue going on. I feel like Cubs fans, every time they hear the back, they go, geez, Rizzo had it, Bryan had it. It's not a good injury to have in the game of baseball. Are we going to hopefully, is he going to be the prospect? I know we got a couple up now, but a big kind of marquee name. Is he going to be up this year?
We'll see with this injury. I mean, one thing that's true is that he has to be added to the 40-man roster in November. So what the Cubs, from the Cubs perspective, it doesn't really hurt them to add him in September and give him that cup of coffee and take a look at him. So I do wonder if they'll do that, because, there's no harm in just doing it then anyway. But part of me thinks that if this injury lingers past maybe, into July, that they're just going to want him to finish the year in AAA, have a good offseason at home in Arizona, and then just start him out probably opening day Wrigley next year and have him be one of those. And we saw a ton of players this year in Major League Baseball have their debuts on opening day. It would not shock me if that was the situation with Brennan next year.
This has been great, man. This is definitely been helpful learning a lot more about these guys. Is there any names that we didn't mention that warrant our attention, over the next few months here?
Sure. I mean, Petrol Armstrong, you kind of briefly mentioned as a guy who just went on the top 100, but he's sort of the guy, I think, in the system this year that's taken the biggest step forward. He was sort of at the back end of the top 10 for me going into the year. Other people did have him higher, and kudos to them for doing so, because right now he'd be number 3 for me, and is showing power where I didn't even really see it coming yet. And he has a ton of speed, probably 70 speed on the 20 to 80 scale, plays a really good center field. So he's really exciting. I'm trying to think other guys. DJ Hers is somebody that I think Cubs fans would really like, a really funky lefty that has posted some of the best strikeout rates of any pitcher in A-ball over the last 10 years. That's had a ton of success, that I think could be a really good player.
Last question before we get you out of here. Is there a prospect around baseball that has been like made available that you know of, that you're like, the Cubs better make a move and go get this kid? Is there anybody like that that's a top prospect that you've kind of been monitoring, that you're like, this is the guy we should go get?
No, I think teams keep that stuff so under their hat. And nowadays, I mean, I think one thing that's really changed in baseball over the last 5-10 years is that teams, I think, value prospects so much higher than they used to. And I think because of that, they're sort of really secretive about who they would even be willing to trade. And I think when you look at guys, you're looking more at like guys that maybe haven't hit that we're supposed to. There's a guy from Houston named Forrest Whitley, who is I think the top pitching prospect in all of baseball, hasn't really been able to translate it over. So if the Cubs make a trade with the Astros in 2 months, that might be a guy you could get that's sort of like fallen off their radar a little bit, right, but a guy that can throw 100 miles an hour and has that pedigree. So, get names like that are exciting, but also, I guess where my mind goes with that question is the Cubs have the number 7 pick in the draft in 6 weeks. And that's sort of like, well, that's the easier place to go. Like, okay, where can they find that blue chip guy who's immediately going to be a top 3-4 prospect for them?
All right, I got one more question. I know Dan just said that, but I'm just wondering if we have any replacements for Wilson Contreras if they do indeed move him. Is there anyone in the system? Because I know Miguel Amaya was such a hot name a few years ago, and he's been hurt now. He's hurt now, but he's been kind of mediocre down there, and I don't know that he's ever going to be a big league starting catcher. So, is there anybody down there like that we should keep an eye on or follow?
I mean, I think the answer is probably no. I don't think that I don't think right now you could say there's a high likelihood that any of the catchers in the minors is like a definite starting catcher in the bigs. I think there's a couple guys that profile as solid backups: Miguel Amaya, Bryce Windham. The Cubs' best catching prospect is playing with Christian Hernandez in spring training right now. So he's 5-6 years away. His name's Moises Ballesteros. A big kid from, I think, Venezuela. That's a really pure hitter, but he's far out. So no, the Cubs don't have a great answer. So either, I guess, if you're gonna keep him, then extend him, and if you're not gonna keep him, then maybe get a catcher back in that trade.
Evan said last question, but we did have a fan. We put it out on our Twitter if they got any questions for Cubs prospects. And here it is, last thing, and then we'll get you out of here. Give me your best pitch for why the Cubs fans have hope in the future.
Yeah, I would say the Cubs have invested a ton of money in the infrastructure of player development over the last few years, and they've prioritized it more than they more than I think they ever have, truly. And I think we're seeing signs this year with just some of the arms. Keegan Thompson starting to turn it around. Scott Effross being a dependable guy. We've seen a lot of relievers come up and look really good for the Cubs that are homegrown, and a couple starters this year. So I think that there's no doubt the Cubs can now develop pitching, and there's lots of really young, fun bats that are a few years away. So I do see it coming together. I think where you look for hope out of a farm system is depth. You don't want a team that just has, 3 really good top 100 prospects and no one after it. You want a ton of bites at the apple. And the Cubs have, I would put the Cubs top 18 prospects up against most organizations in terms of they have a bunch of guys that I could see being big leaguers. And you get that many bites at the apple, you're going to get a couple all-stars.
There it is.
Yeah. There
Thanks
we go.
again. Yeah, that's that. There it is. That's the pitch right there. Again, he is Bryan Smith. He's a writer for Bleacher Nation. You can find him on Twitter at Cub Prospects. Bryan, thanks so much for being here.
Guys, it was fun. Thank you.
Thanks, man. All right. Thanks again to our guest, Bryan Smith. Again, you can find him on Twitter at Cub Prospects. All right, Dan, you got a would you rather for us this week?
I do. And it ties in kind of to our guest and talking about, prospects building a team. Evan, would you rather be the GM for the Cubs or the GM for the Bears?
Oh, I think it's for the Cubs for me. I don't know. You get a lot more time to watch prospects in baseball. I think, you can draft somebody and they could be down in high A and nobody's really keeping an eye on them for a few years. So you have a little bit of leeway. If you miss on a first round pick too, it's like, it happens. That's baseball. In the NFL, if you miss in the first round, like that's, think about Kevin White, like everyone remembers that pick and like how bad that worked out and everything. So for me, it's baseball. What about you?
All right. Taking baseball because the job's easier. Got it. A
lot less pressure. Yeah.
a lot less pressure. You could hide behind those shitty picks. For me, I'd go Bears. I don't know. I think it's definitely more high stakes. I don't know. You see the results of your draft picks that same year, to where, like you said, baseball, you draft a kid who's 18, you got to wait 5 years for him to, mature into the player that he could be. All right. You got a fast fact?
I do. So, we talked about Cubs prospect, the minor leagues. How many minor league teams do the Cubs have, Dan?
Minor league teams? I'm going to say 5.
The answer is 7. It's Iowa Cubs, AAA. Tennessee Smokies are AA. High A is the South Bend Cubs. And then single A, you got Myrtle Beach Pelicans. That used to be known as low A. Now it is single A. Then the rookie league is the Arizona Complex League Cubs. And then we got the foreign rookie league, which is Dominican Summer League Cubs.
Oh, come on.
And the Dominican Summer League.
It's 5 teams. We're talking rookie league teams.
Yeah. So you got a couple foreign rookie league teams, but yeah, that's the structure of the Cubs minor league. So
okay,
in case you didn't know, all right. But that's our show for today. Thanks again to our guest, Bryan Smith, for joining us. For Dan Sloak, I'm Evan Bierman. You've been listening to the Domestic Draft Podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to rate the show. You can find us on Twitter at Domestic Draft, on Instagram at Domestic Draft Podcast. Our website is domesticdraft.com. And you can watch the show on YouTube. Just search up Domestic Draft and drop us a sub. Thanks again for listening.
Cheers.